Hello my friends, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Novella. Today I want to talk about translated fiction and why you should read more translated fiction. Now, we always read for a certain reason. We read to relax, we read to learn, we read to make ourselves more fluent in our own language, we read to pass the time, we read for so many reasons. And translated fiction can make your experience even more interesting and more, special. Let's keep it to that. More wondrous and adventurous. So we read often because we know we can learn from books. I always say it's thinking with somebody else's mind. You are in somebody else's head and the protagonist is faced with certain difficulties and you can learn from him or her how to deal with those issues. We can learn how to not do certain things, or we can learn to understand how it feels to be, for instance, an addict, or somebody who is a refugee, or who is at war, or who is living in a community that is very religion-based and strict and where there's no freedom for youth, for instance. Those are all reasons that are very valid to read literature. Now, why translated fiction? Well, it is the cheapest way to travel, in a way. It is the best way to travel, in a way. Because when you travel as a tourist, you don't really get to know the culture. You're not one of the people who live there. So you go to certain festivals, for instance, and things that are organized there, and you go and see the local monuments and the old buildings and the beautiful sites, and people talk about that. There's a guide who will explain you this and that happened there, and he was shot there and she was crowned there and whatever. But you don't really can grasp the feeling of what it's like to be, for instance, somebody who lives in India, or somebody who lives in Argentina, or in Japan, or in Uzbekistan, for instance. The best way to feel that is to read literature that comes from that space. There's even a big difference between reading about a space but written by somebody from your own part of the world. It's a lot more interesting to do that to read somebody's work from the certain place you want to visit that day or that week. It's a lot cheaper too to travel. I mean, maybe the cost of books have risen, but traveling is expensive and you need holidays. Anyway, now reading translated fiction can help you enormously to understand different cultures, different ways of living, different ways of raising kids, different ways of dealing with crime, with killers, with all sorts of stuff that comes our way. It can help us to learn how the people from Africa are impacted by global warming, or how indigenous people in Brazil are dealing with the hundreds of acres of forest that is cut every day. So yeah, it is a brilliant way to learn more about the world, learn more about things and way of thinking that is not influenced or is not translated in your way of thinking or interpreted in your way of thinking. I mean by that, for instance, when you watch the news and you see some American normal hardworking guy, when he talks about his life, you immediately feel that the way they live is different than the way I live, for instance. So we always say, I don't know if it's 100% true, but probably it is, Americans or people from the US live to work, and we, like in Europe, we work to live. We work to enjoy more of life. And it can help you with relaxing about your job, about the importance of your job, about the importance of having a lot of money to buy a lot of stuff. You can read a book about somebody who is living in a cabin somewhere in Austria and who is living a simple but beautiful life, good healthcare, with healthy children, a couple of cows, and they can be even way more happier than you will ever be if you only think about stuff, owning stuff. That's one of the things, and it helps you understand how the world thinks about your country. You get a beautiful insight of tradition, family values, philosophy, the way they think, the way they have politics, and the way they tell a story. For instance, Japanese stories are often very distant, a little bit colder. In French literature, you have often a little bit of more sensuality, and they will often talk more about cheating and adultery and the beautiful ways of life, sometimes not. You learn about how life is different in the hood somewhere in Brazil or somewhere in Paris, the banlieue of Paris, and in the United States, for instance, in Skid Row. So it's everything, although we face the same problems, we deal with it differently, and it's interesting to see how other countries deal with the same problems. And it's also a beautiful way to explore the landscapes of other countries. Imagine you read a book by somebody who lives in Zimbabwe and talks about nature, or in Rwanda about the greenness of the rainforest, or somebody who lives in Mongolia about the vastness of the land there, and the yaks and the local communities there that still travel and have a yurt, and where they live in the tent camps, and or maybe how it is to live as a refugee somewhere in a camp in Lebanon or in Egypt or wherever, or how it is to be a refugee and to cross the Mediterranean Sea and be in danger, and even when you arrive there you're not sure if you can stay, and you're hungry and you want to make a life for yourself, and you want to escape from certain regimes. There is so much to learn, there's so much more out there that you can explore and see. Beautiful stuff and ugly stuff. Romantic stuff and very harsh stuff. You can learn how it was, if you read often with Argentinian literature, they often refer to the regime that was there till the 80s. Or if you have more Eastern European countries, you can read about the Soviet Union and how living in that era was, or how it was to be a fisherman somewhere in Norway, or yeah, you learn so much. Your life will become so much more interesting in a way, because you have that knowledge, you have gathered that knowledge, and sometimes when you travel to that certain area where you have read a couple of books about, it will feel like you're coming to your second home, and you feel more connected to the people who live there. And maybe you will recognize things you have read about, and you know, the little stories of that little coffee shop on the corner, and their troubles with the shoemaker at the end of the street, and just so much to learn and so much to taste and to smell and to, yeah, to love. So how do you select a book? Well, the easiest way is to go to your library if you can. And you take a book that is in an area that comes from an area where you always wanted to travel to. And you look at the blurb, and if the blurb is really something you might want to read, well, you read. And then if you really liked it, you read other stuff, like here from Claudia Pinheiro. She has now another book. But also, just don't keep it to this author, but also look at who was the translator. Because they will have translated other novels from that area or from that language. And then you go further and further and further, and before you know it, there's a whole Garden of Eden full of books that will open for you, and you will be so happy and so proud of yourself that you have opened yourself to foreign literature that otherwise you would have never discovered, tasted, felt, and yeah, all your senses. You have to use all your senses when you're reading. So yeah, that's it. Try to read more translated fiction. Try to discover how different a Japanese author writes from an Indonesian author, from a Russian author, from I don't know, a Scottish author or a Catalan author. It is so wonderful to feel how different everything is. Even when you read a basic thriller, you will notice that if you are from the States and you read something from France, a thriller from France, you will notice quickly that guns will hardly even be mentioned, because it's not a part of our culture. You will notice quickly that the influences are completely different, that we find other things more important. Just do it. Try to read more translated fiction. You'll love it. I'm sure of it. Talk to you later. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye bye.